Hello, my name is Ken Kramer, and I'm an interviewer with the Public Library of Cincinnati in Hamilton County. And today I'm interviewing Howard Mushaben. I got that right?
Very good.
Okay. And this is August 28th, 2006, at the Anderson Branch Public Library. Our camera operator today is Michael Alfieri. So, thank you for being here today. This is exciting.
It is for me. It's a pleasure. I enjoy this. I'm a buff on World War II. I love stories.
Yeah, there's so many neat stories
Oh, I
that need
have
to be
read
told.
so many great stories. I just finished reading them. I picked it up at the health club. Some guy had left it there. Chronicles of World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And there were some stories in there, tear your heart out. This one guy was on Saipan, and he captured 1,500 Japanese.
Wow.
Yeah.
So today we want to hear your story.
Oh, okay.
So
okay.
Maybe you could start out by talking a little bit about what your life was like, what your situation was like prior to entering military service.
Okay. That's simple enough. I was born in 1922 in a house, in our home. Back then, you didn't always go to the hospital.
Right. What city?
Right. And
what city?
Cincinnati.
Cincinnati.
Yeah, a lot of people call it St. Bernard. It was the last street in Cincinnati.
Okay.
And I had a mother and a father, and I had two sisters and an older brother who we'll talk about later. He went in service about a year before me. And when I was 7, we moved to our first home that my dad purchased. And I went to St. Clement School through 8th grades, and I went to Roger Bacon, which was just a stone's throw up the street. After that, the Depression was still in force in 1940. And my buddy and I, we went looking for jobs. We couldn't find anything. And we got a call from the Unemployment Bureau, I forget what they called it at that time. And we went down to register. And then shortly thereafter, we got a call, wanted to know if we wanted to go to a mechanical school. I said, that sounds good. We both went. We took a 10-week course. It was called Mechanical High. It's not there anymore. And we learned machine operation and things of that nature. So after 10 weeks, we then went around looking for jobs again. And I played to all the machine shops and places like that. And finally got a call from Alice Chalmers. And I started at Alice Chalmers in September 1940 for 45 cents an hour. I like to tell my kids this story. 45 cents an hour. I got up early in the morning, had to take a streetcar, transfer to get to Norwood for Alice Chalmers for 45 cents an hour. Total less than $1,000 a year.
How much was the streetcar ride?
9 cents if you bought tickets. You bought a strip of tickets for 45 cents. Okay, so it was a kind of a menial job. You know, I had no high skills, but I was there for about 2 years, and all of a sudden we had some activity. Some of my friends don't like this too much, but a guy was trying to unionize a place, and it needed help, believe me. So here I am, just a young kid, and I get involved in that, and I become the first recording secretary for the union.
Wow.
So, but after 2 years, things are going on, you know. My brother went into service September of 41, and it came to be about my time, 42. I knew I'd be drafted, and I wanted to go in the Air Force. I thought I wanted to be, because of my mechanical work at the plant, I wanted to become an aircraft mechanic. So this buddy of mine, he was probably 8 years older than me at least, picked me up at 6:30 one morning, November 19th, 1942, with his wife, and we drove to Dayton, and we enlisted at Patterson Air Force Base at the time. And I think maybe the guy was pulling my leg, but it appeared that I was going to be turned down for some reason or another, and this, I don't call him a recruiter, interview or whatever, something like you, Ken. He said, oh, you're the guy that wanted to get in so bad. I said, yeah. So anyway, he signed me up and I was in. Stayed there just a few days. Then we went to Fort Thomas, Kentucky, which was an army camp at that time, to get our clothing and shots and things like that. And so when I was there, in December I could come home, and that's where this picture of my brother and me was taken on his only leave. So then from there, I have a total itinerary there. We left on the 23rd of December 1942 and went down to Biloxi, Mississippi. That was my first real camp. We arrived there on Christmas Day. Here I am, just a young kid, never been away from home. It's warm and balmy. The guys are playing basketball, and there's a recording going on. Bing Crosby singing "I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas." You can imagine how I felt. So, but anyway, how I got to Keesler, apparently I did pretty well in school, and I guess I had some smarts, and I must have done well on the clerical test, and they said, this guy's going to be a clerk. So, just a short time in Biloxi, we had a little drilling. I never had real boot camp, never. And so after, I forget now, it's in the book, a month or so, we took a train to Los Angeles, and that was first class. We had Pullmans and ate in the dining room, so imagine that. Here I am, a buck private, see? So we drove all the way to LA, and we were enrolled at Sawyer Business School. And there I had English, letter composition, typing, so I learned to type. And that went from January until March. And did pretty well, I suppose. I still can type. Oh, now you use computers, right, Mike? Oh, you're not supposed to be there. So anyway, then from there, after I completed that, went up to Utah for the stop-line point. And there I was assigned to Ephrata, Washington. So we got there in, I guess it was March 1942, and I was assigned to a group. It was a B-17 bomber training group. And I had one of the thrill of my life as a young kid. There was a training flight going on, and it was a formation flight. And I decided I wanted to go. I had never flown before. And the guy said, well, you're crazy. This is a training flight. So I said, that's all right. So I went up, and I never forgot the instructor's name, who was the pilot training the other pilot. His name was Lieutenant Baronswig. This was 1942. So,
amazing.
and the thrill was he let me sit in the cockpit of that B-17 flying around the state of Washington. So that was fantastic. But I met some good friends there. We had our officer was a colonel, very efficient, very quick.
Are you going to tell me more about the plane ride?
Oh, well, it didn't last too long, but you look out the windows, and there you were, the wing tip, and that's why the guy said I was nuts to go on the train formation flight.
I got it. Yeah.
So, but this colonel, we used to have to use carbons. We didn't have copy machines then, so we'd have as many as 13 copies that we'd have to type. And I remember this one kid, he was slower than heck, and the colonel got ticked off at him. He sat down at the typewriter himself and did the whole thing. So after a while then, I forget how many months, let's see here, Freda. Oh, in October of I was there some time up in Ephrata. That was right in the center of Washington. But I was a homebody. I never went off the base. I was content. I wrote a lot of letters home and so forth. Went to mass every week. So then, October 20th, 1943, we flew to Ardmore, Oklahoma. That was going to be another temporary stop with our B-17 group. And we were there until, again, December 23rd. So the second Christmas then, I spent on a train.
Oh.
And that was at Peyote, Texas. And I didn't find out until I was discharged. On the back form of my discharge paper, it said that I qualified with the carbine rifle at Peyote, Texas. I never got off the train. We were on that train for 3 hours in Peyote, but my form said I qualified there. In fact, I never shot a gun all the while I was in the Army, Air Force. So from there then, we were on our way to Camp Kilmer, which was a stop point for overseas. And we were there just briefly, you know, you got shots and that sort of thing. And then we took off on January 16th on the USS Bienville. It was a little troop ship, held about 2,000. And coincidentally, this very best Army buddy of mine happened to be on that, and I didn't know him at the time. And so that's just how we...
What's his name?
His name is Vince Verlod, V-E-R-L-O-D. And I'm going to tell him about this. I already told him I was being interviewed. I'm going to show him the picture that I'm submitting so that he knows that he's part of my life in the Army. So, but we used to sleep in racks. You know, there were, I think, 4 of them. You'd be there and there'd be somebody right on top of you. And you didn't have facilities for bathing. I recall that I went close to 10 days without taking my clothes off. And we finally got so tired of it, we went up into the huge latrine and just took our clothes off, and guys were dumping water on us just to get freshened up a little bit. So, but it was really strange. Going across the Atlantic in January is quite a trip. You know, the first day or so, most of us got a little seasick, but after that was okay, because with the Atlantic, in January, you'd be down here, and then you'd be up here, you know, with the waves. And I had guard duty one night, and you tell your whole life story to the guys you can't even see because it's pitch black. It's black out, no, you know. So that was interesting. I never forgot that, though. So then we landed on my mother's birthday, January 29th, 1944, at Cardiff, Wales. And from that point, I won't belabor this, but we made a lot of stops. You know, 2 days, 3 days, a week, a little bit longer. That was in England, okay? And
were you assigned to your permanent unit?
No, no. We were just moving around then.
Okay.
And then finally, it had to be April 1944. I was in a pottery. They called it Taunt, the English name. And I was there from April 25th until September 28th, 1944, stationed in England. There I was permanently assigned to the 49th Air Service Group. And I was in group headquarters in operations. And if there was going to be a move, it was our responsibility to draw up the plans for moving the unit. And I had told Mike about this, that I had a major for a boss. And he was a man about town. He lied to ladies, and he'd go to London quite often. And he let me run the show. And I picked up a nickname, Moose, you know.
Really?
Yeah. And I did the whole thing. And he would sign his name. But later on, it got to the point I could sign his name. He didn't even know if it was his signature or mine. But he was good for me. He was good to me. And they'd ask me to do something. He'd say, "Oh, no, Moose is too busy. He can't do that." So we were there, and then after D-Day, which was June 6th.
Excuse me. How did you acquire the name Moose? What did?
Well, Mushaben was a German name, you know. When I went in, at home I was called Mose. I was called Little Mose, and my brother was called Big Mose, and my dad was called Mr. Mose. Is that something?
Yeah.
So, but those things evolve, I guess, because of the name style.
All right.
So, but then we knew on D-Day, we knew something was happening. We were not aware of it. Nobody was told, that was a big secret. But we heard the planes rubbing up, you know, drumming, and then taking off. Well, what we serviced, our group, the C-47s, it's a DC-3, which towed the gliders in on D-Day.
Wow.
That was, so we were an air service group. And a funny story, we had a kid in the outfit, he was younger than me, his name was Schmelz, I never forgot him. And the second day, we were all assigned, I had a carbine, some had 45s, and he had a machine gun. He stowed away on one of those gliders and went over to to France, you know. Well, they found him and shipped him back, but he was a real character. So that was nice duty. I was far removed from the scene. The Lord blessed me. I had nothing to happen to me, and we were in our cot every night, and we were in this big old brick building. I don't know I forget what it was used for, but that's where this picture of me with my buddy on New Year's Eve with the big loaf of French bread and the bayonet sticking in the table. And we had a little pot-belly stove. That was the heating. And we'd lay bread on there to toast it, and that was a real treat for us. But one day across...
You were in the barracks here?
Yeah, that's where we lived. That's where we lived, yeah. And it was cold because there was no heat, see? Mm-hmm. So our headquarters then was right across the street. And one day this Vince and I, we happened to notice there was like a trapdoor going up into an attic. And we went up there, and there was paper probably a foot deep, all German. They had thrown stuff up in there. So we said, hey, this would be a pretty good place to stay, you know. So we talked to the sergeant major about it. He said, yeah, if you want to clean it up, that's okay. We cleaned that thing up and put our cots up there, and we really became very good friends at that point. But the only responsibility we had was the boilers downstairs in the basement. We had to keep them going for the heat in the building. But it also enabled us to have the advantage of nice warm showers anytime we wanted to. And nobody else had that, see? Some of our best friends would come over and we'd let them take a shower in there. So we lived there very in close proximity, as you can imagine, for all that time. And then after that, of course, we were there for quite some time. Let's see here. Then, again, when we flew over, we were in several places, famous names like Le Mans, you know, where the big races are. That was just a short stop, till we finally got to Orléans. In the Army term, it's called Chateau d'Un, but it was actually Orléans, the home of Joan of Arc. So we arrived there on November the 4th, 1944. And I was there until the 20th of April, 1945. That was before the war ended. So we were all set to go to the Pacific. So for days we were packing big green boxes with all our supplies and everything else. And we took off for Marseille. I rode in an ambulance, and we had to make one stop over, and I remember that first night we laid on the ground under the stars, and that was our bed. So on the way, August the 15th, 1945, that's the day the war actually ended. So we got to Marseille, and of course then the decision was made to divert us, and we came back to the States. And we came back what I call class, as opposed to what we went over on. It was the USS General Brooke. And we were able to go in and sit down in the mess hall and have meals and things like that, but it was really nice. And so I got back home, I forget when we landed in New York.
Excuse me 1 minute.
Interrupt me, because I go on like a broken record.
Well, I'm looking at a picture of Lourdes. You said you visited there?
That was after the war. Okay.
You came back to visit there?
No, before I came home.
Okay.
So then, when the war ended then, there's a great picture of me in here, but I guess we can't show everything. I was at a cafe, outside cafe, on the VE Day. They let us go to town. And the picture shows me sitting there with a whole group of GIs at this outside cafe. So, but then when the war ended, knowing I was Catholic, they said, would you be interested in going to Lourdes? I said, hey, sure. So I got a 3-day pass or whatever it was, and got to Lourdes, and being a kind of religious young man, I was pleased about that, and I even got to serve Mass at the Grotto of Lourdes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I never forgot that. And I took a bath in the tub there, and only recently, I brought home a big bottle of Lourdes water, and only recently did I use the last of that Lourdes water. Yeah. So that was a really nice trip. Slight pause here. But the journey coming home was nice because it was in September. And it so happened that my brother was going to get married around the 10th or so of September, and for some reason or other, he decided to put it off a week. Well, I got home on September 11th, a very significant day a few years later, right? 9/11.
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
So, as it turned out, he got married on the 15th of September, and I got to be in his wedding in our uniforms, you know. So then I had to leave, and then they sent me a telegram and extended it 15 days. So that was the first leave I had, except for 7 days that I got when I was in Freda, Washington. And I came home from Washington in a coach, didn't sleep, of course, except sitting in a chair. That was 7 days plus travel time. It's the only leave I had in my 3 years and 6 days until I was at the point of discharge. So then after that, I was told to go back to Bear Field at Fort Wayne, Indiana. And I was there from September the 9th until September 11th, 1945. No, yeah, that's right, I was there. Then I went home, and then I went back to Bear Field, and that's from where I was discharged. So that's the whole story of my Army life, and I never regretted it. You know, some guys could not adjust to the Army. I did. I grew up, you know, I was 20 going in, I was 23 coming out, and I learned something about life, and you learn to live so closely with people, and to, you know, to make allowances for the differences. For example, in England, we slept in steel Quonset huts, and they were cold. And our mattresses were what we called biscuits. I'm kind of rambling on here, but there were 3 big sections, you know, 1, 2, 3. That was your mattress. You know, the thing would slide off the bed, you know. And again, and then they had everything spread out in England because of the fear of bombing. Our mess halls would be here, and our living quarters would here. We had to walk, I guess, a couple of miles every day to the mess hall, just because they were all spread out. But
Sure, hungry when you got there.
Yeah, right. Except they served a lot of mutton, and we could smell that all the time. But one of the things.
Did you learn to like mutton?
I like lamb, but I don't like mutton. But one of the things I brought, and you probably won't be able to show it, was one of the young boys typed up a list of the members that were living in hut number 7, and all our home addresses, and thinking this was September 7th, 1944, you know.
How many people were there?
About 12, I think about 12. And I've kept that all these years, you know, and I know since then, just within the past 5 years, 3 that I had been in touch with have passed away. One kid from Milwaukee, one from Worcester, Massachusetts, and I forget just offhand now where the other was. But living in that close proximity, you really became close with people, you know. There were just 12 of us, and we all had nicknames, you know. They called me the Rabbit because I had big buck teeth, you know. But you didn't take offense to that, you know. We had one guy, forget what they called him, he was in the medics, you know. So everybody had a nickname. So it was a great experience for me.
Some people were able to adjust to
Right,
that, and
right.
some can't. But
And some people, you'll wonder, when we went in initially, you know, you'd go in line, you'd get shots, 3 at a time. And it didn't bother me a bit that I can see guys, boom, flopping right down, you know, from just from the tenseness of getting those shots. But all in all, for me, it was a great experience. I had a lot of faithful letter writers, you know, was my family and things like that.
And then those letters meant a lot to you.
Oh, yeah,
I'm sure.
right, right. But, you know, getting back to my boss again, Mr. Major Gabler, he was required to censor our letters. So he read my first letter, and after that, he never censored another letter. Yeah. But of course,
He could trust you.
I used my judgment. I would never, you know, disclose anything that wasn't to be disclosed. But some of the things, it's funny how your memory holds things. We had a colonel before. Oh, I don't have him in my memoirs, but his name was Harold Dungan. He was a colonel. And he wasn't a very good pilot, but he was in charge of all these other pilots. And we got a message one time from Eisenhower, and I'll never forget it. Here he is, a colonel, in charge of the whole shebang, and he writes on it, strongly approved. I thought that was pretty neat for him to do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But again, I said, I'm rambling on.
Go right ahead.
Early on, before we went overseas, we were, I don't even remember where we were, but we had, our sergeant was a master sergeant, and he had, I still remember, he went to Texas Tech University. And we'd line up about 6:30 in the morning, you know, fall out, you guys, and I can still hear him. Was my name Mushaben? Something triggered something in his mind, and he used to kind of sing out, "You must have been a beautiful baby." God, that's 60 some years ago. Yeah, going back to 1943, I suppose that was.
Well, those are the stories that should never be forgotten.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
so.
yeah. So, while we were in France, Vince and I, we used to go into town, and Army boys don't like to do their laundry. And we found a little old lady, and I can't remember her name, but it was French. And talk about a hard life. Her hands were like leather, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And we used to bring our laundry into her, and she had a little stove that she would use to do our laundry. And we would bring her little goodies. I'll never forget one day we brought, this kind of jokes me. We brought her an orange.
Oh.
You thought we gave her the world. She hadn't seen an orange for so long.
Oh, wow.
I can still see that little old lady.
Yeah.
So it was really, you know, it was heartwarming. When we were in England, food wasn't that great either. And we used to go out into town, and we would buy things to eat, you know. And I'll never forget one place we'd go, they had a little stove, and we would get baked bean sandwiches. And we thought that was a real treat. And of course we had a lot of fish and chips. You know, they'd be served in newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
You probably have seen that yourself.
Yes, I have.
Yeah,
Good.
right. So it's just sitting here talking to you, you know, some of these things come back to me. But this young man that I entered the service with, never saw him again. Never saw him again. Even after we came back from the service. So I don't know whatever happened. Yeah, his name was Jack Schutz. And I used to go to his home and met his family. We were pretty close too. So all in all, like I said again, getting to repeat myself, it was a great experience. And
do you have other memories that you're particularly fond of that you think people should be aware of, or that you haven't already talked about?
Well, let's see now. Let me pause here for a minute. You want to stop for a minute there, Mike? And
I was just wondering how your life in the military or your experiences influenced your life after you got out, and your career and your life. And so
really things didn't change much. I come from an old German family. My dad was born in 1879. My only grandparents I knew and she died when I was over in France, July 20th, 1945. She was 9 years old in the Civil War. So that shows you how far back I go, that I can remember a grandparent that was 9 years old in the Civil War, you know.
Wow.
But my dad got a late start. He was 38 when he got married, see. So we came from German stock. We were very disciplined. The Depression came. My dad did very well. He was a Hoover sweeper salesman. And my dad made good money back then. He was probably making $60 a week because he was a heck of a salesman. Then they wanted to make him a supervisor. My dad knew something about super. He said, I don't want any part of that. So he quit. October the 29th, 1929, the stock market crashed. He had just quit his job. 4 kids. I was 7. My kid sister was 5. My older sister was 10, and my brother was 12. So he didn't work a day after that, except he was mechanically inclined. And during the war, during the Depression, he would send out little postcards to repair Hoover sweepers, and people would bring him to the house, and he'd charge them $2.50, you know. So here my father was, and we just had bought a house in 1929. Moved on their wedding anniversary, paid $8,200 for it, cash, and didn't work for pay after that. Everybody says, how did he do it? Well, my dad was a frugal man, you know, he made things out of nothing. And like I said, he made pretty good money and made some investments. So we went all through the Depression, and we were disciplined. See, we learned to live with what we had. We each had our own bed, my brother and I, my 2 sisters, and we had a comfortable home. We didn't have some of the extra things, but we learned to cope. So I went into the service, and it was easy for me to adjust, you know. And so when I came out, I was 23 in 1945, and then I was home until 1951 when I got married. So I spent time with my 2 sisters and my parents, and again, I was able, after I forgot, after I came back, I was looking for a job. Well, things were still tight, and I didn't want to go back to Alice Chalmers. I had learned the nice life of being in an office, see? So, but I couldn't find anything. So I went back to Alice Chalmers, and when I left, remember I told you I started for 45 cents an hour. When I left 2 years later, I was way up to 63 cents an hour. So when I came back then, it was in January of 46, I was way up to 83.5 cents an hour. And then I became involved in this union, see? And in March, went out on the picket line. We went on strike. And I said, well, this is not for me, you know. So I started looking around, and I found a new job with I was still in Norwood then, so I found a job with an outfit that advertised for the dairy industry, ice creams and sodas and big posters. Name was Gunlack and Company. And so I got a job with them, and I would type orders and letters and things like that from a dictaphone, you know. So I stayed there. I started with them for $130 a month. And I worked there for about a year, and I wasn't getting anywhere. I could see I wasn't getting anywhere. So I kept looking around, and one day I saw an ad for American Steel and Wire, and that was my salvation. And by that time, we had moved down to the West End, 8th and Harriet, and they had to be there at 5:30 for an interview, and I couldn't make that, you know, so I had to come across town, but I went anyway. And the assistant manager was still working there. His name was Harry McInerney, long since gone. And he interviewed me, and I told him, you know, about myself and so forth and so on. And somehow or other I had a good feeling when I left that maybe I was going to get the job. even though I went in there cold. And it wasn't too much longer, and they called me, and I was hired. And I started then. This was June 23rd, 1947, for $160 a month. And I was there only a week. I had been making 170 by this time at the other place. I went from 130 to 170. And Mr. McInerney said, "What did you say you were making there?" I said, $170 a month. He says, "We'll make it 170. So from then on, my good fortune started, because when there would be a strike, and the union boys at the plant, so we were in the sales office, they would get a raise, we would get a raise. So I went from, in a couple of weeks, I guess it was, I went from 170 to 200. Then I got a 10% raise, I went to 220, and it just kept going on like that until I got a little stature. And finally got up to, well, like I said, I got from 47 to 51 and got married. And by that time, I was making around 300 or 330 a month. Kids won't even work at McDonald's for that today. So, but that was a good fortune for me. And we had a savings plan, and being very frugal, I got into that. And when I retired, I had a fairly nice sum and carried me through. And while I'm on pension today, it isn't that great, but with Social Security and the pension, we're comfortable. Our house is paid for, our car's paid for, and my wife and I, our main pleasure is, for her at least, going out to dinner. So we like to do that.
Well,
we enjoy that.
This has been great.
Yeah.
And,
So
it's been an honor for me to interview you here, and I want to thank you. And hundreds of thousands of people for your contribution, and you're willing to take the risks so that we have the life that we have today.
You know, I
felt thanks for that.
a couple of years back, my brother advised me, and I have a license plate, World War II veteran, you know. And I came out of the store one day, there was a note on my car thanking me for our service. You know, I thought that was really great. But there's so many stories. Mine was nothing. I was a civilian.
No, everybody made a.
I was a civilian in uniform. But when you read these stories, if you want some good stories, the story of these boys on Iwo Jima lifted that flag, not faithful to our father, something like that. He was the son of one of the guys, and then there's the one about the boys that were on the ship going to Japan, and we sank it, you know. There's some great war stories.
Sure, yeah.
And I never get tired of them.
And that's why I'm so glad this project is continuing.
Yeah, it's good.
Great.
Well, because some of these guys that went through so much, they didn't say a thing, and when they're gone, people find stuff in the trunk, and they find he had a whole chest full of medals and so on.
Yeah.
You know, I've got my medals framed at home, big deal. Good conduct, American Victory Medal, the American Campaign, and then the one for what they call the European West African Campaign, you know. So, you know, and I just got those not too long ago. We didn't get any medals when we were discharged because they were shoving people out, and I heard you could do that. So I wrote and found out, filled out a form, and so they sent me my medals, and I'm kind of proud of it.
Absolutely.
And my old ice jacket with my stripes on, you know, I sent that to my son. By the way, my good old Major again, on the way home, on the boat, he saw that I got promoted from sergeant to staff sergeant.
All right.
So he took care of me, and I took care of him. Ken,
Great. Thank you.
it's been a pleasure. I God bless all those guys that never came back, and the horror stories that you read. I just read in this Chronicles about Saipan, what those boys went through, and the horrendous tortures and things. I have a very dear friend, a niece by marriage. Her father is a survivor of the Bataan Death March. And he's written several books, which I have, which he has signed. It's unbelievable. So once again, God bless America.
Absolutely.